Welcome in everyone. In today's video, we're giving you guys the ultimate beginner's guide for Monster Hunter Wilds. We'll be covering everything from new mechanics in Wilds to giving a rundown of a typical hunt, and even going over various basics like consumables, damage mechanics, and crafting systems. We'll also be throwing in some tips and tricks throughout the video so that even some veteran hunters may learn a thing or two as they dust off their gear and prepare to head out into the new lands. Without further ado, let's get started with all the new stuff that Wilds brings us. Monster Hunter Wilds brings us a few new mechanics as well as putting a spin on some mechanics we've seen from previous games. The biggest new mechanic in my opinion is the new manual aiming feature called Focus Mode, which lets us precisely aim melee attacks and guards. Primarily, this is to allow us to more easily focus on attacking specific parts of a monster to apply the new weak point mechanic, but it also allows us to change directions mid-combo for some weapons should we have a slippery target or see a more opportunistic strike as we're winding up. Elaborating more on that weak point mechanic that I mentioned, should you repeatedly attack a monster enough on a specific part, you'll wound that monster part and create a weak point that does additional damage when attacked. You can see these weak points as well as the monster's natural weak points when using Focus Mode. On top of doing extra damage when hit, weak points are extremely vulnerable to our weapon's new Focus Strike attacks. A Focus Strike is a special move executed while in Focus Mode that deals extra damage to a monster's weak points and usually looks sick as heck. Focus Strikes will pop a monster's weak point for extra damage as well, so be ready to reapply weak points once you've landed a Focus Strike. And the last new mechanic in Wilds is your new travel buddy, the Sacred. These adorable little fluff balls grow up to be an impressively useful ally in your future adventures. The Sacred is a bird-like mount that will accompany you on your journey through the game, giving you a variety of quality of life features. One of the main features is that the Sacred can autopilot you to your destination, making navigating through the new world a lot easier. You can also use items while mounted, meaning you can sharpen and heal while pursuing your monster as it changes locations. Your Sacred also has an item saddlebag that will receive useful items for the hunt at the start and periodically throughout the hunt. These items include some healing items as well as various useful items for the specific monster that you're hunting. For example, if you're fighting something that's venomous, you'll receive antidotes, or if you're fighting something that inflicts blights, you'll receive nullberries. And one of the best features of the Sacred is that it can hold a second weapon for you to use on your hunts. You're able to swap to the second weapon by calling your Sacred and choosing the swap weapon option when it's near. This allows you to switch up your combat style mid-fight, or simply lets you use two of your favorite weapons easily. That's all for the new features that Wilds brings to us, so let's move on to getting you caught up to speed with the basics of monster hunting. Monster Hunter at its core is a very simple game. Find a big monster, beat it up and take its parts, turn those parts into shiny new gear, then use that gear to beat up another monster. Rinse and repeat until you've lost your sanity. The only real question is, what weapon do I want to use to beat this thing up with? Just pick something that looks interesting to you and swing it around to see how you like it in the training area. You can always switch to another weapon whenever you want, even if you're in the middle of a hunt. To get started on a hunt, simply choose a quest from the quest giver, head out into the world, and find that monster to start your hunt. From here, we'll go over the normal behaviors and events that happens while hunting a monster so that you're not completely caught off guard. While fighting, every so often the monster will enrage, indicated by the monster roaring, sometimes visually changing to be angrier, and a red indicator popping up on the monster's minimap icon. When enraged, the monster will become significantly faster, will hit harder, and sometimes will unlock new movesets. Learning how to adapt your fighting style for when a monster enrages is an important skill to know, as people tend to get carded in 1 or 2 hits when the big guy gets pissy. Generally, I switch to a more defensive approach until the monster calms down, and once I've become more familiar with the enraged moveset, I continue the beatdown. Do note that some monsters have special mechanics that can force them into or out of an enraged state, which is usually mentioned in the monster's journal entry. Every now and then, the monster will also run away and relocate to a new area on the map, usually after it takes a decent amount of damage. While this might get a bit annoying at first, it's actually a great opportunity to recollect yourself. Use this time to top up on health, heal any debuffs, restock on items from a camp, and most importantly, resharpen your weapons. Weapon sharpness is in the upper left of your screen with the exception of ranged weapons. Weapons have multiple levels of sharpness, degrading with every hit. Once the bar empties enough, your weapon's sharpness will drop a level indicated by a color change. Sharpness directly affects your weapon's damage output as well as its capability to pierce a monster's hide to do full damage. We'll get more into that a bit later, but for now, just remember that if a weapon's sharpness gets too low, it'll become too dull to hurt the monster and your attacks will literally bounce off. So sharpen your weapons as needed, especially when you have downtime during the hunt like right now. When you eventually catch up to the monster, you might notice that it's gone to an area that already has a monster wandering about. As terrifying as it initially seems, this is actually a good thing more often than not, as the monsters are pretty territorial. 2 monsters in one area normally means they'll start fighting, which is called a turf war. In a nutshell, this is just free damage for your hunt and is sometimes accompanied by a visually spectacular fight. Every monster has multiple parts to it, with the general areas being the head, chest, legs, arms, and tail. If you do enough damage to a specific part, you'll end up breaking that part, which, in addition to dropping extra materials, may alter the fight in some way. For example, if you break a monster's leg or wing, it may limit its mobility by causing it to trip every now and then. By breaking a monster's head, you could disable its breath attack completely. Breaking a part can also make that part vulnerable to other weapon attack. For example, breaking a hard carapace covered area with a blunt damage hammer may make it vulnerable to piercing and slashing weapons now that the hard carapace is shattered and gone. Each part has its own respective loot pool in regards to what extra material may drop when the part is broken, which you can see from a monster's journal entry. But it doesn't take too much thinking to know that a horn is likely to drop from breaking a monster's horn, or that a tail is likely to drop from breaking and or carving the monster's tail. Did I forget to mention that you can straight up cut off some monster's tails? Carving a monster's tail right in front of them works wonders when you're trying to assert dominance, by the way. And one more neat thing you should know for hunting monsters is the mounting minigame. If you attack a monster from above, you have a chance to mount the monster and initiate a little wrangling minigame. The monster will attempt to shake you off, at which point you need to brace down and hang on. Once it stops bucking you off, you can repeatedly attack the monster and knock it down. After attacking enough, you'll apply a weak point to the section where you were attacking. You can move around on the back of the monster to easily apply weak points all over it. You can attack the monster with a light or heavy knife attack or with a mounted weapon attack. After hitting the monster enough, you'll be able to do a finisher attack which does a lot of damage and knocks the monster down. Just keep an eye on the upper right to see when the option for a finishing attack appears. Now, when you're fighting the big beastie, you may be wondering how far along you've gotten and where the health bar is for the monster. There actually is no direct health bar in Monster Hunter, and the only indication of the monster's health is the visual representation of how beat up it is. You simply have to keep hitting the thing until it keels over, at which point you can claim your rewards by carving the corpse. The closest thing we have to a monster's health bar is just a minimap indicator of a little skull near the monster's minimap icon, which tells us that the monster is nearly done for. The monster usually starts attempting to limp away and relocate once this indicator pops up. When the monster reaches this state, you can actually capture it by snaring it in a trap and using 3 tranquilizer bombs. Capturing the monster instead of defeating and carving it will give additional part rewards and usually is good to do for the first few hunts of that monster if you're aiming to build something out of it. However, if you need rare parts from the monster, those are usually only rewarded by defeating and carving it, so do whichever gives you the best odds for the material you're after. You can see all the rewards from carving, capturing, and more in the journal entry for that monster. Now that we're done with the basics of hunting, we'll go over some additional hunting tools you'll find to help you along your hunts. The first and biggest tool of all is your Palico ally, which directly helps you in a hunt. In addition to basic attacks, your Palico has a variety of abilities such as a heal, status effect cleanse, and even a taunt. You can see all the abilities and gear your Palico has from the Palico info menu. You can also craft weapons and armor for your Palico to increase their stats or just to change up their drip. You also have a wrist-mounted slinger, which is a useful tool to launch various status effect ammo to assist you in your fight. You can find ammo in the world like thorn pods that stick to a monster and do extra damage when struck, or you can craft ammo like the flash pods that act like a flashbang and blind the monster if shot in its field of view. Your slinger can also be used to collect resources from a distance when riding on the back of your sacred. There are also multiple environment traps scattered throughout the world that can be activated with your slinger, ranging from boulder traps that land on the monster to do damage, to vine traps that can be pulled down onto a monster and immobilize it for a few seconds. In addition to traps, you'll often find helpful wildlife as you run around the map. These can include Vigor Mantle Bugs that can heal you, Wriggly Itchies that provide a stamina buff, Flash Flies that blind all nearby enemies, and more. And last but not least, we have one of the most beneficial hunting tools that every hunter should utilize on every single hunt, as if it doesn't even help you, it at least looks insanely good. I'm talking about food. In Monster Hunter Wilds, you can eat a meal for various buffs. At the very minimum, you'll get a large increase to your maximum health and stamina, as well as a feast for your eyes. You can have up to 3 ingredients per meal, with each individual ingredient adding onto the meal buff in some way, either giving extra stats like attack or defense, or giving you special buffs like more healing or reduced stamina consumption. You can cook these meals anywhere, but they do require items you've collected to be used as ingredients, so make sure to stock up on ingredients you like best. Hunting meals aren't the only thing you'll be eating a lot of, however, as Monster Hunter Wilds has a plethora of extremely useful consumables to help you in your hunts. It may be a bit overwhelming at first, but the most important thing you should know is the basic items you should have for every hunt, which in my opinion are just potions for healing and traps with tranq bombs for capturing the monster, or just using the traps for free damage opening. From there, you can expand the list of items you bring depending on what you're hunting. Are you fighting something poisonous? Pack some antidotes. Are you getting hit with blight debuffs? Pack some nullberries to cleanse them. As you gain more field experience, you'll learn more about the numerous items and what they're good for, to the point where you'll habitually pick up screamer pods to counter anything that burrows underground. Some of these consumable items can be simply purchased from the merchant, but if you constantly do this, you'll find that your wallet will get empty really fast, since crafting gear also costs a lot of money. Instead, it's recommended to collect raw resources out in the world to craft what you need. I highly recommend just taking note of what you see and where you see it, since those resources will always respawn at that location. Also, to just grab everything you see with your slinger as you travel, since it's so convenient now. You'll also be able to see resource locations on the map if you're just out for something specific, or if you're the kind of person to plot out farming paths. Before we move on, I wanted to note a few important resources that you can never have too much of, so that you can grab them out in the field, or take note of where you can find a lot. Herbs and honey are always needed, as they're used to craft low and high potions. Bones and ores are used for crafting starting armor and weapons that eventually upgrade into late game items. Bitter bugs are a very commonly used crafting material for a lot of different consumables. Might seeds and armor seeds are used for potions that give you a raw attack or defense buff respectively. The next portion will be the most technical area of this guide, but I promise you I'll make it nice and easy to understand. And that's understanding the basics of damage in Monster Hunter. It's honestly a lot simpler than I've made it sound, as all damage can be generalized to how effective was your hit. When you hit something in Monster Hunter, a colored number pops up showing how much damage you've done. A white number indicates that the hit was normal and your damage wasn't increased or decreased. An orange number indicates an effective hit and you've done extra damage as a result. Depending on your weapon type, you'll have to hit different areas of the monster to get orange damage. Sharp weapons like soft bits to stab and slash, while blunt weapons like hard bits to smash. You can check a monster's journal entry to see what parts are weak to what weapon type. Now on top of the damage color, we have an extra multiplier for critical hits and weak point hits. This is just extra damage on top of the damage you've just done. A critical hit is based on the weapon's affinity and is indicated by a red mark above the damage number alongside a sharp audio cue indicating that you've landed a crit. Each hit has X% chance to be a crit depending on what your weapon's final affinity is. A weak point hit is triggered every time you land a hit on a monster's weak point, indicated by a bunch of arrows pointing at the damage number. Remember that weak points are created by repeatedly attacking a part of a monster. And since we're reviewing things, I'll also throw in a quick word about sharpness here. Higher sharpness means more weapon damage and better capability to do orange damage to a monster's parts. If your sharpness drops too low, a part that previously had orange damage may drop to white. Now, we're going to take this one step further because you guys are all such great students and touch up upon elemental damage. Still keeping things simple, every monster has some sort of elemental strength and weakness. And the same goes for you depending on what armor you're wearing and what weapon you're swinging. If you or a monster is hit by an element that it's weak against, i.e. a low or negative resistance number, the hit will do more damage. And vice versa, if you or a monster are hit by an element that it's strong against, i.e. a high resistance number, the hit will do less damage. As a general rule of thumb, try to have a high elemental resistance against what you're fighting. Optionally, you can use an elemental weapon that the monster is weak to, but honestly, just using a non-elemental weapon is perfectly fine as well and is actually what I prefer to do. Just make sure you don't use an elemental weapon that the monster is strong against, or you're going to be in for a long ride. Alright, enough with all the technical stuff, let's start talking about crafting some shiny new gear. You can craft new weapons and armor at the smithy at the cost of some monster materials and some money. Let's go over armor first since it's a bit simpler. Your character can equip 5 pieces of armor, which each have various stats in terms of regular defense, elemental defense, and skills granted by each armor piece. You can see what each skill does by hovering over that piece of armor or the entire set, opening the submenu, and selecting the skill info option. Some armor sets also have set bonuses or group skills, which are activated when you're wearing enough armor pieces with that same group skill. Skills are extremely important in Monster Hunter as they provide various bonuses ranging from simply increasing defense to buffing specific weapon attacks or enhancing their mechanics. Finding the right combinations of skills is key to taking your game to the next level. In order to do this, it's not uncommon for hunters to wear multiple pieces of armor from different sets in order to achieve what they want. This usually happens in the mid to late game, however, once high rank is unlocked. For the early game, you generally just want to build the beefiest armor you can, as the early game armor skills don't really make that much of an impact, and at this point it's more important to get a lot of defense so you don't get one shot as the hunts get tougher. And before we move on, I'll take a second to point out and talk about skill gem slots. Skill gems are unlocked later in the game and are essentially free skills that you can attach and remove from your armor. The catch is that every armor has its own set of gem slots and can only equip so many skill gems. Each skill gem and gem slot comes in a small, medium, or large variant, which can only fit its respective size or smaller. So a small gem can go into any slot, and a large gem can only go into a large slot. Both armors and weapons will eventually have gem slots as you progress through the game. Now let's start talking about weapons. In Monster Hunter, you can craft a base weapon and upgrade it using various materials in order to make it stronger. You can see what weapon upgrades into what by looking at the upgrade tree line, as well as what materials are required to do so. If all you see are a bunch of question marks, that means that you've yet to discover the monster and/or the parts that are necessary for the upgrade. Weapon stats are pretty straightforward. Each has a raw attack, some amount of critical chance aka affinity, may or may not have an element, has various sharpness levels, has a number of gem slots, may or may not have a defense bonus, and may or may not have an extra mechanic depending on the weapon. As you progress, you'll start to see that your weapons will have skills built into them. You'll also notice that each weapon line has some sort of trade-off that sets it apart from others. Some trade-offs are obvious, such as some weapons having less normal attack but having elemental attack to make up for it, and some are less obvious, such as the bone tree having a much higher attack than normal, but significantly less max sharpness. Honestly, it's just up to you as for what weapon you want to use. The last thing we'll talk about here are armor spears and talismans. These are unlocked after finishing a handful of story quests and are the first steps to powering up your character. Armor spears simply allow you to upgrade your armor and give them more defense, making you less squishy for your hunts. Talismans are wearable charms that simply give you free skills. They can be upgraded later in the game to improve the skill effects they give. Now that we're familiar with crafting gear, let's go over some of the miscellaneous yet helpful things you'll find in the hub. Unfortunately, there is no grand food canteen in Monster Hunter Wilds. Instead, we have a little ingredient center that will periodically provide us with the rations we use for cooking. There is a support desk palico that offers limited bounties, requesting you to do various simple tasks like completing hunts in a specific area. Completing these limited bounties rewards you with various useful items such as armor spears, melding tickets for crafting, and hunting points. You'll find the training area in the hub as well, which is where you can test out and get familiar with the various weapons in the game. There's a very versatile training dummy in the training area which can be modified by talking to the training area manager Palico. Personally, I spent a lot of time in the training area when I first started playing Monster Hunter, so don't feel bad if you end up doing the same. You can see various tutorials and tips to help you learn how a weapon works in the various game menus. Finally, before we wrap up the video, I'll share some of my best tips and tricks for both new and veteran hunters alike. I highly recommend setting up an item loadout as soon as possible. It'll save you a ton of time when restocking between hunts. Personally, I just have an all-purpose item loadout that consists of potions, traps, nullberries, and antidotes, which I equip before every hunt. You can also adjust and save your item hotkeys as loadouts as well. If you want to get really specific, you can adjust the order of how your items appear in your bottom right item bar, and optionally hide the less usable items like throwing knives and binoculars. You can bring the crafting components of consumables in order to have more of that item by crafting it mid-fight. For example, if you bring 10 potions, 10 honey, and 10 mega potions, you essentially have 20 mega potions since 1 potion and 1 honey craft into 1 mega potion. I like to do this for my mega potions and traps in the harder hunts. The bone and ore tree are great starting points for weapons and armor, as the materials are easily gathered and the base stats are usually very well balanced. Don't forget that you can fast travel from the map. You can switch maps by switching to the world map once you've unlocked multiple regions. Grab every material within arm's reach when you're first starting off, as there's a good chance you'll end up needing it down the line, especially since it's so fast and easy to do so from your sacred's back. As you progress through the game, you'll eventually unlock pop-up camps, which are just forward bases scattered throughout the map. It costs some hunting points to set up, which are acquired from simply playing the game. These camps can be used to restock items, heal your hunter, and are fast travel points as well. However, camps can be destroyed by monsters, so don't be too surprised if it suddenly disappears. When you're setting up a camp, you can see the threat level of the area, which indicates the likeliness of the camp getting destroyed. And that's all we've got for today's video. As always, please leave a like and subscribe if you found it helpful. Let me know in the comments if I missed something that you think should have been included in this guide, or ask away if you have a question about the game and I'll do my best to try and help you out. Good luck out there and happy hunting!